Good morning traders, welcome to another exciting RMD weekly market overview. Last week has been quite exciting with lots of movement in the markets and consequently many of our target levels being hit spot on. This week we look at various divergences popping up across the market and possible pullbacks presenting some excellent trading opportunities. I'm going to let the disclaimer roll and I will see you in the charts. We are starting with the US dollar to South African rand, and what can now be clearly seen is how we have broken through and out of this channel, this bearish channel that we've been in for the last month. We can see that we have also finally managed to break through the 100 SMA on the 4-hour. This is a level that has been acting as resistance at least twice, and we've now clearly broken through that, even coming back to briefly retest this breakout area. And what I'd also like to point out is that our monthly pivot from last month was sitting on 17 Rand 10 cents, and that was our target as set out in our market overview video last week. And as we can see, we have perfectly hit that number on Friday. So looking at what we can expect for this week, just looking at a quick projection of this W bottom structure that we've seen. If we were to project that upwards from the neckline that we had, we can see that takes us around about the 17 Rand 25 level. We also have the monthly pivots estimated at 16 Rand 90, so that's somewhere between the 16 Rand 90 and 17 Rand level. The reason I'm stating an estimate monthly pivot is because the pivots have not yet been calculated this month. Considering targets, we can expect probable targets in the area of, as I've mentioned, 1720. That is a previous area of what used to be support, and then it turned resistance as we were descending in this bearish channel. That means that will very likely now be an area of overhead resistance as we move into it in the week to come. That means that the first level to look out for would be 1720. I expect slightly further resistance at 1750, and ultimately I think we can probably look for a target at the 17 Rand 50 level. That will be close to our monthly R1 pivot, and also the same area of our last high that we saw in the middle of June. And just briefly looking at our weekly pivots, we can see that those target areas I've mentioned lines up with our weekly R1 pivot level, and of course our stretch target is also very close to our weekly R2 weekly pivot. Moving on to Euro USD, and starting by looking at our economic calendar for the week, you can see again we have lots of news that might have an impact on our US dollar pair. We can see there's some manufacturing PMIs on today at 4 o'clock. We have non-pharmaceutical employment changes. We have non-manufacturing PMIs. We also have on Friday hourly earnings, and also non-pharmaceutical employment changes again, and unemployment rate on Friday. So all high impact events, and some GBP events as well for the GBPUSD. But just quickly moving back to the chart, we can see that EURUSD is still in a bearish trend, and momentum has been quite strong over the last week. However, I do want to point out that we have some bearish divergence. If we look at the MFI, that's the money flow index, we can see that we are no longer making higher highs on the MFI. In fact, we're making lower highs, whereas looking at the same period on price, we can see that we are making higher highs, meaning there is divergence. This is a bearish divergence, and that means that we can expect price to pull back. Looking at possible areas for a pullback, I'd expect that pullbacks can be anywhere between 1.157, so that would be the monthly R2 from last month, and then of course somewhere in the region of 1.60. And the reason I'm saying 1.60 is if I can see that that was an area of resistance that we broke through, and then we came back to retest that area, and it became an area of support. That means that that will very likely be an area of additional support as we move into this area, and also considering that our estimated monthly pivot would be in this area as well. Also take into account that we have our 100 SMA on the 4-hour that will probably meet up in this area as well. So there would be quite a confluence of support in this area. So should we see a pullback, this is the area to look out for. And of course, should we expect any bullish price action from this level, or perhaps even from the level that we're currently at, we can look at bullish targets of 1.204, and that would be our weekly R2 pivot level. So, and that will also bring us, if we were to draw a trend line across these tops or these highs, we can see that will probably meet up with that line. And looking at the GBPUSD, a very similar picture to here USD. We can see that we've been in a very strong upwards trending market. We have now reached what appears to be some resistance, and that's actually a diagonal that is extending back quite a while back, as far as the highs that we saw in April 2018. So it was a very strong level of overhead resistance. We can see that on our daily time frame, this level has been clearly rejected thus far. And just moving back to the 4-hour time frame, looking at possible areas of support for a pullback, the immediate area for support would of course be the weekly pivot sitting on 1.3. And then just worth pointing out is that we had a bullish target last week, and that was discussed in our market overview video at 1.289, and that was over here. This is this pink line that we see over here. So that was clearly then breached, and that will also be an area of support. So should we see a pullback, we can expect a pullback in this region, and of course we can also expect the confluence of this 50 SMA and 100 SMA in this area to be an area of support. Just worth pointing out as well, similar situation that we had on the EURUSD is there appears to be some very slight bearish divergence where we had a price making higher highs, whereas the MFI and even our RSI is now struggling to make higher highs, just indicating that there is in fact bearish divergence present. And of course, should we do manage to break out of this level, we can expect targets in the area of our weekly R1 pivot at 1.324, and perhaps our monthly R1 pivot, and also our weekly R2 pivot at 1.338. Now moving on to the Australian dollar USD. So price reached our target, a very bullish target that we set at 0.72. As we can see that target was indeed hit on Friday. So we are very glad that our projections are playing out this well. But it's just worth pointing out at this stage that we have now reached an area of extreme bullish divergence, where we can see that price is making higher highs, and looking at our MFI, we can see that we are no longer, and for quite some days, have not been making any new highs, in fact making lower highs on our MFI. So very strong bearish divergence present. And just worth noting that on our economic calendar, we have quite a couple of events coming up tomorrow on the Australian dollar that might have an impact on volatility, as well as on Friday with some monetary policy meetings and discussions. So just keep an eye out for those events. Looking at potential targets, just quickly looking at our pivots. At this stage, we are still in a bullish trend. So we still want this trend to break, or if this trend breaks, and that break would probably happen at the 0.715 space. So that would be the area to watch for price action. If that space breaks, we can expect price to move lower to this area of support at 0.703. And of course, that will also be an area where we might find some additional support from our 100 SMA on the 4-hour, and also the same area that we are estimated monthly pivot will be at 0.78. So this would be the area to look out for support. And of course, should we manage to find, or should the Australian dollar USD manage to find its feet on this weekly pivot, and we see some bullish price action, we can firstly expect price to go back to the highs at 0.721, and then if it manages to go slightly higher, we can probably expect it to go as high as 0.729. Yes, that is where our weekly R2 and also our monthly R1 pivot would be at. Briefly looking at the S&P 500, unfortunately the S&P 500 did not reach any of our targets, be that our bullish or bearish targets. In fact, the US 500 has instead consolidated between the 3,280 and 3,200 level. Very important level to currently watch would be this 3,200 level, as a break below this would likely see us move further down towards this dynamic area of support, being the 200 SMA on the 4 hour, and that level will probably be at the 3,175 level. And of course, should we manage to break out of this overhead area of resistance and back into this diagonal break that we've experienced, we can expect price to go higher towards our weekly R1 at 3,300, and then perhaps even slightly higher to our R2 pivot, our weekly R2 pivot at 3,350, and that will also be an area of diagonal resistance if we project those highs forward. And of course, just worth noting that our 100 SMA has been acting as the area of support, dynamic area of support, for quite some time now. So a close, a 400 close below this might be what triggers sell-off and bring us back towards this 200 SMA on the 4 hour. Now looking at Brent crude oil, lots of mixed signals with Brent crude oil. We can see after that quick and very brief tag at the 44.85 level and the rejection, and that does appear to be a mini double top. We have had a sell-off, and then we had this very interesting morning star reversal off of the 200, taking us back into this consolidation area. So a lot of mixed signals with resistance as well as support, and buyers stepping in at various levels above and below where we're currently trading. The level to currently watch would of course still be this $43.50 area that we've also pointed out in our previous market overview videos. So should we manage to see any form of bullish price action off of this level, we can of course expect the price to move back to that $44.80 level. And of course, should we see bearish price action and perhaps even a break below this 200 SMA on the 4 hour, which has been an area of support for quite some time, this would likely take us lower to the estimated monthly S1 pivot at 41.50, and that is also very close to the lower end of this shadow of the candle that we saw on Thursday. And if that were to fail, a very strong area of support would be at $40.50. Just quickly enabling the pivots, we can see that our weekly pivot is projected at the $43 area, so that would be the area of immediate support. So should we manage to break below this area of the 200 SMA and a weekly pivot, we can expect a price moving lower. And of course, should we see any bullish price action above our weekly pivot, we can likely expect a retest of this area of overhead resistance at 44.50 to 44.80. So that concludes Brent crude oil. And perhaps just before we end, just take note that we expect crude oil inventories on Wednesday 4:30, so that will of course also have an effect on price. Gold continuing its spectacular bullish run last week, with price now finally hitting some overhead resistance at 1,975. That is even above our yearly R3 pivot, which is a very, very exceptional event. We set out a stretch target for gold last week at 1,955. So that would be the area at in this area over here. So gold broke straight through that. And in fact, that area now becomes our area of support. As we can see, that was the last area where we had gold finding its feet, with all the last couple of 4-hour candles now bouncing off this 1,935 level. And just quickly looking at our projected pivots. So should price now pull back, which we, well, at least what I think is the case at this stage, immediate areas of support, as mentioned, 1,935. We also have a breakout area with this diagonal that we can see at our weekly S1 pivot area. That would be 1,920. And of course, we can see that our 4-hour 100 SMA and 4-hour 200 SMA are also converging on pivot levels. The 100 SMA converging on the weekly S2 pivot, and the 200 SMA on the 4-hour converging with our monthly S1 pivot at 1,825. Something I do like to point out is again the very strong bearish divergence. So we can see that price is refusing to make new highs, whereas our MFI is very clearly now making lower highs and in fact trending downwards. So I'm just quickly going to hide our pivot levels and show you how we have very strong bearish divergence on gold at this stage. And then just looking at this price action, that any break below this level of course will take us firstly to that 1945 level, and should that break, it will take us lower to the levels as discussed. Finally, concluding with Bitcoin. Bitcoin has absolutely crushed our bullish target set at 10,410. And of course, in hindsight, that has been a very conservative target. But with cryptocurrencies and our crypto markets, and especially Bitcoin, and increased volatility, anything can happen. And we can see that we had a massive jump of price out of that level straight to the $11,000 level, where we had a very brief consolidation. And this level currently holding steadfast, with lots of shadows below this level, but price remaining above it. So that would of course mean that our immediate level of support for the week to come would be $11,000. And that is also our weekly pivot at currently at the same level. So lots of convergence happening at this level now. Our 50 SMA on the 4-hour also coming into this area, meaning we have a convergence of various support levels in this area. Should price manage to break below this, we do have some additional support on our monthly pivot at 10,500, so just below that. And then considering possible bullish targets, if we do see continued bullish price action from the support area, the next areas of resistance would be at our monthly R1 at 12,250, as well as this previous area of overhead resistance at 12,300. And as we've seen so far, Bitcoin has a lot of bullish momentum when it starts moving. So a stretch target would be our yearly R1 pivot at 12,950, very close to the 13,000 level. So that would be our targets for Bitcoin for the week to come. If you enjoyed this week's video, please remember to subscribe. And while you do that, why not also have a look at our exciting new mirror trading platform? We have put a link for you down in the description with more information. Then finally, a shout out to our amazing subscriber base. We have now increased to over 300 subscribers. Remember, we are doing this for you and would love to hear your thoughts and comments. Until next time, this is John Jacobs for RMDTRADER. Trade smart and trade successful.